Bitter criticism, a terrible day in Lebanon. Terrible day, a lot of dead people. Almost 600 people died just yesterday and today. As usual, I'm going to check it out what's going on in Al Jazeera economy. I will read it. Al Jazeera economy. Editor's analysis. Economy, U.S. election 2024. For Harris and Trump, runaway U.S. debt is the elephant in the room. Both presidential candidates have unveiled costly proposals that will greatly add to the ballooning national debt. The U.S. Treasury Department building in Washington, D.C., Pablo Martinez Monsive, by John Power, September 24. Correction, this article was being updated with a more recent Tax Foundation estimate of how Trump's proposals would increase the deficit. Once upon a time, the United States ballooning national debt was a major talking point for the presidential elections. Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton's final debate in 2016 featured a dedicated 12-minute segment on the topic. Barack Obama and Mitt Romney clashed on the issue during all three of their debates in 2012. Fast forward to 2024 and apparently the national debt is not important anymore. The word debt did not come up once during the word debt did not come up once during Trump and Kamala Harris' first and so far only debate earlier this month. The Republican Party, traditionally most eager to claim the mantle of fiscal responsibility, did not include a single reference to the debt or the deficit in its 16-page platform document released in July. It is not as thought the debt is any less relevant today than it was during recent elections. Quite the opposite. In 2012, the national debt is excluding money owned by the government to itself stood at $11.4 trillion, about 69.5% of gross domestic product, GDP. Today, it stands about $28 trillion, or about 99% of GDP. Almost everything. The Congressional Budget Office (CBO) projects that the figure will top $51 trillion in the next decade to take the debt to GDP ratio to 122%, higher than in the aftermath of World War II. Neither Trump nor Harris has paid much attention to this ticking time bomb, much less put forward serious proposals to refuse it. In fact, both candidates' policies are set to make the situation much worse. While grandiose promises by politicians are not new, Trump and Harris have rolled out so many costly pledges, from Trump's promise to extend his 2017 tax cuts and exempt overtime from taxes, to Harris' plan for $25,000 in assistance for first-time home buyers that independent budget forecasters have struggled to keep up. The Nonpartisan Tax Policy Center has estimated that Harris' agenda will grow the deficit by as much as $2.6 trillion over the next decade, while Trump's proposals will increase the shortfall by between $2 trillion and $3.1 trillion. The Penn-Harton budget model, which does not include some of the candidates' most recent pledges, estimates that the deficit will rise by $4.1 trillion under Trump and $4 trillion under Harris. Neither candidate wants to address it. Gary Hufbauer, non-resident senior fellow at the Peterson Institute of International Economics, told Al Jazeera. Quote, they both decided that talking about reducing debt is a losing proposition, end of quote. Hofbauer added, there is some debate among economists about just how much debt the U.S. economy can take on before it becomes a serious problem. Unlike households, governments have indefinite planning horizons that allow them to constantly roll over their debts. When it is time for governments to repay lenders, they can simply issue new debt to meet their obligations. Compared with other countries, the US has a particular advantage when it comes to managing debt due to the dollar status as the world's primary reserve currency, because the dollar is held in large quantities by central banks and financial institutions around the world. The US government can borrow at lower interest rates. It can also take on debt in its own currency, enabling it to avoid exchange rate fluctuations that will raise the cost of repayments. Still, there is little disagreement that there is a point after which the debt cannot keep growing without serious economic repercussions. Economists that depend Wharton budget model argued in an analysis published last year that financial markets will not sustain publicly held debt surpassing 200% of GDP. Jagadish Gukale and Ken Smithers predicted that the US government had about 20 years to take corrective action before reaching a point where no amount of tax increases or spending cuts will avert a default, a scenario that will send shockwaves throughout the global economy. Quote, this time frame is the best case scenario for the United States under market conditions, where participants believe that corrective fiscal actions will happen ahead of time. Gokale and Smithers wrote in their analysis published last October. Quote, if instead they started to believe otherwise, debt dynamics will make the time window for corrective action even shorter. Even if such a catastrophic outcomes as a government default does not come to pass, the CBO has forecast that all federal government revenues will be directed towards Social Security and debt interest payments by the mid-2030s. With every cent in taxes swallowed up by mandatory government spending, future administrations face being constrained in their ability to invest in nurturing innovation or respond to emergencies such as recessions or the next pandemic. Unfortunately, there is no pain-free solution to that problem that does not involve some combination of spending cuts and higher taxes, and the longer action is put off, the more bitter the remedy will be. Oh, they are sending me a message. They love me. They love this channel. I love you too. Economy Al Jazeera. But in an era of populism, politicians have little incentive to talk about difficult choices, and voters have little incentive to listen. So this is a category, a concept I also like, the incentives, because right here in Chile there's no incentive to study. That's the whole truth about this country. There's no incentives to innovation. Unfortunately, that's why I'm learning Chinese to head to China.